I'd like to just start off today by asking you a question. How many of you know people who do not communicate? Okay, then I'd like to have you do a little program here with me, a little exercise for just a minute, and it goes like this. When I tell you to, I'd like to have you not communicate. So for 2 minutes, in just a moment, we're going to not communicate. So here for the next 2 minutes, don't communicate starting now. What did you find out? Would someone share what they discovered in this situation? Okay, you discovered that, in fact, we communicate almost all of the time. And we don't recognize that, but we do it just the same. In fact, I say the dead even communicate. Now, I know we're not talking about spiritual kinds of things, or we're not talking about seances, or that kind of a thing. But if you were to watch people as they walk by a casket at a funeral, you'll see that the dead person is communicating with them. You will see the reaction of the people as they walk by. That's a form of communication. So we all communicate all the time. Now, the next question I have to ask you is, what is effective communication? Okay, well, let me tell you a story. The story goes like this. When I was a child once, I had a cousin named Steve, and Steve and I were about, I think we're 5 days apart in age, and we went to the same school. And we were in the first grade, and I was in one class and Steve was in another class. Well, one day I came out of class and I noticed that I had a little owie on my finger. That is, there was a little blood spot, and I was just kind of curious. I wasn't hemorrhaging, I wasn't bleeding to death, but it was a little spot that was just kind of curious to me. So when Steve came out of class, I said to Steve, "Steve, look, blood." And Steve made a surprise move that I couldn't have anticipated. He started crying. Well, you know, I have people who are very empathetic and concerned about me, but I've never had one cry because I had a little thing on my finger. But he also did something else. Steve grabbed his head and he headed out of the building. Well, that was kind of interesting, but I went in pursuit because we walked home together and I wanted to catch up with Steve and see what was going on because I really didn't understand. And so as I got out the door, I noticed that Steve was down in the street where the crossing guard was, and the crossing guard was just pawing through his hair, looking at his head. And what was Steve doing? Yeah, he was crying. So I followed on, and when I got to near his home, I got to his home, and here was Steve in his house with his mom, and what do you suppose she was doing? Yeah, she was pawing through his head, or hair, and looking at his head, and what was Steve still doing? Yeah, you're right, he was crying. Now, what happened here? Anyone like to explain what went on? Okay, well, what happened was obvious. When I pointed with my finger like this at Steve, he thought it was at him. He thought that his head was bleeding, and that elicited all those responses. Now, my question to you is that effective communication? Well, yeah, to me, effective communication, there's a rule that, and this ought to be Rule 2. Rule 1 was we communicate all the time. Rule 2 is that effective communication, the definition of effective communication is that whatever I try to convey to you is what you receive. What I send, you get. And Steve, in my case, in this situation, I sent some powerful stuff to Steve, but Steve didn't get it. He got some more powerful stuff, but it was not the right message. So, Rule 1 and Rule 2. We need to go on now because the next question, of course, is what does this have to do with you? And in your business, in your position, what does that have to do with you?